حي على الفلاح.
Colossal pyramids, imposing temples, golden treasures, enigmatic hieroglyphs, powerful pharaohs, the different gods, and mysterious mummies are features of ancient Egyptian culture that have fascinated people over the millennia. Today, Egypt's rich history has created a tapestry of cultural and archaeological treasures unmatched anywhere in the world. When the Greek historian Herodotus wrote that the ancient Egyptians' land was given to them by the river, he was referring to the Nile, whose waters were essential to the rise of one of the world's earliest great civilizations. In order to benefit from the Nile, people who lived along its banks had to figure out how to cope with the river's annual flooding. They also developed new skills and technology, from agriculture to boat and shipbuilding. The Nile even played a role in the construction of the pyramids. Beyond practical matters, the vast river had a profound influence upon the ancient Egyptians' view of themselves and their world, and shaped their religion and culture. As the religious leader of the Egyptians, the pharaoh was considered the divine intermediary between the gods and Egyptians. Maintaining religious harmony and participating in ceremonies were part of the pharaoh's role as head of the religion. As a statesman, the pharaoh made laws, waged war, collected taxes, and oversaw all the land in Egypt. After the period of the pharaohs, the Persians replaced the country about 340 years before Jesus. But the Persians were themselves overthrown by Alexander the Great, who conquered Egypt about 332 BC. The Ptolemies ruled the country from this time till 27 BC. When Augustus replaced Egypt after defeating Cleopatra and Mark Antonio and Acteum, and finally the mighty Romans. But the crumbling of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine arose, which ruled until the Arab Islamic wave spread over the region. The Arab leader Amr ibn al-As radiallahu an conquered Egypt in 641 AD, thus ending the Byzantine rule of Egypt. Egypt became an Islamic province ruled by deputy of caliph. He built the first mosque, established new city, and gave it the name of Al-Fustat. Today, with a population of over 100 million, 90% of Egyptians are Muslims, and about 10% are Copts. Ancient Egypt began with two separate kingdoms, the Upper and Lower Kingdom. Menes, the first pharaoh, united the Upper and Lower Kingdoms. This was the beginning of the first dynasties of ancient Egypt, when being pharaoh was passed from one family member to another. It was also during this period in which the early writing system of hieroglyphics was created. One characteristic they shared was the importance of religion. Both civilizations were polytheistic and worshipped multiple gods. Both civilizations also built amazing structures to honor their gods. Egyptians built pyramids as tombs for their deceased pharaohs. Ancient Egypt is one of history's most fascinating civilizations. However, Egypt was conquered several times by some of the world's most famous ancient empire. At the end of the prosperous Middle Kingdom period, Egypt's pharaohs had ruled for thousands of years. However, the second intermediate period saw Egypt's power decline due to plagues and feuding dynasties. In the resulting upheaval, Egypt's first foreign rulers would emerge in approximately 1650 BCE to form the 15th dynasty, otherwise known as Hyksos. The Hyksos had been moving into Egypt as migrants for centuries before the emergence of the 15th dynasty. These migrants likely came from parts of the Levant in Western Asia, with the majority of them being Canaanites. As Egypt's native dynasties collapse, the Hyksos gradually took control of Lower Egypt, Northern Egypt. The Hyksos were incredibly influential. They introduced several technological innovations that may have included chariots, composite bows, and the bronze khopesh, the famous sickle sword associated with ancient Egypt. During the New Kingdom era, Egypt conquered several neighboring kingdoms and expanded to its great extent. Many pharaohs like Thutmose III launched campaigns into Nubia, a prosperous civilization to the south also known as the Kingdom of Kush. Although the Egyptians conquered much of Nubia, the region flourished. Nubia possessed valuable commodities like gold, ebony, ivory, and horses. The flow of these luxury goods made Egypt even wealthier. The Egyptians also built several temples to their gods throughout Nubia. One of the greatest pharaohs in ancient Egypt was Ramses II, or Ramses the Great. He reigned from 1279 to 1213 BCE. There was a famine in the land of Canaan, Palestine. Because of this famine, the Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam traveled with his extended family of 70 to Egypt to both live in better conditions and be with his son Yusuf alayhi salam. Yusuf's wisdom had impressed the Pharaoh of Egypt to the point that he was appointed Viceroy of Egypt, which was second in power only to the Pharaoh. The 12 sons of Yaqub became the origin of the Israelite tribes. The next 430 years in Egypt saw the Israelites prosper and rapidly multiply to about 3 million people. These numbers were so great, Ramses became nervous that the Israelites were becoming too many in number to control, and thought they might side with Egypt's enemies in case of war. Ramses decreed that the Israelites should be enslaved to build cities and roads for him, so that they would be too tired and also would not have time to have children. Then Allah sent Moses alayhi salam, and Harun alayhi salam, Aaron, to Pharaoh and his people, supported with miracles, to call them to believe in Allah alone and to stop persecuting the children of Israel. But Pharaoh and his people rejected the message, disobeyed Allah, and disbelieved in him and his signs. So Allah commanded his messenger Musa to depart from Egypt with the children of Israel. Pharaoh pursued them with his troops, and Allah drowned them in the sea. But he delivered Musa and his people into the land of Sinai. In the 8th century BCE, a Kushite king named Kashta managed to peacefully take control of Upper Egypt. However, his son and successor Pia took a very different approach. In approximately 728 BCE, after ruling for about 20 years, Pia assembled an army and invaded Lower Egypt. However, the Kushite pharaohs would soon attract the unwelcome attention of one of the ancient world's most powerful empires, the Assyrians. The Assyrian king, Esarhaddon, marshaled his forces and invaded Egypt in 674 BCE. Despite a costly campaign, Taharqa defeated Esarhaddon, inflicting one of Assyria's worst losses. But Esarhaddon regrouped and invaded again in 671 BCE with a larger force. This time, the Assyrians won and seized control of Memphis and much of Lower Egypt. Starting in 550 BCE, the Persians ascended rapidly under Cyrus the Great and conquered much of Western Asia, including Babylon. After Cyrus's death, his son, Cambyses II, sought to capture the wealthy lands of Egypt. In 525 BCE, Cambyses engaged the Egyptians at the Battle of Pelusium. Cambyses emphatically defeated his opponents before besieging and capturing Memphis. The last pharaoh of the 26th dynasty, Psamtik III, was captured and deported to Susa after just 6 months on the throne. After ruling for 3 years, Cambyses died in 522 BCE. Almost immediately, several provinces across the empire rebelled, including Egypt. However, the new Persian king, Darius the Great, marched to Egypt and quickly ended the uprising. Egypt flourished under Darius, who sponsored many Egyptian temples and even completed a canal near modern-day Suez. After Darius's reign, Egypt rebelled against several Achaemenid kings, including Darius's son, Xerxes I. After being the dominant power in Western Asia for centuries, the Persians faced a new challenge with the arrival of Alexander the Great. At just 20 years old, Alexander gathered his Macedonian armies and set out to conquer the mighty Achaemenid Empire. After the brutal siege of Tyre, Alexander headed south and entered Egypt. Instead of a fearsome conqueror, the Egyptians saw Alexander as a liberator who would overthrow the Persians. Indeed, the Achaemenid satrap Mazaces quickly surrendered Egypt to Alexander. As he did across Asia, Alexander founded a new city in his name, Alexandria. Alexander only stayed in Egypt for a year before pursuing the Persian king Darius III. After his victory at the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander took control of the Persian Empire. However, he never returned to Egypt and died in Babylon in 323 BCE. By the reign of Ptolemy XII in approximately 80 BCE, Egypt was a shadow of its former glory. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BCE, his son, the 10-year-old Ptolemy XII, and his teenage daughter, Cleopatra VII, succeeded him. However, several powerful court officials exiled Cleopatra and took control of Ptolemy XIII, plunging Egypt into a civil war. While the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 CE, Egypt remained under the control of the Eastern Roman Empire. In 618 CE, Egypt was occupied for 10 years by the rival Sasanian Empire before reverting to Roman control. However, everything changed in 641 CE when the Muslim Arabs of the Rashidun Caliphate liberated Egypt. Khalifa Umar radiallahu anh dispatched a 4,000-strong army to Egypt under the command of Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anh, followed by a 5,000-strong force in 640, which defeated the Byzantine army at the Battle of Heliopolis, resulting in the introduction of Islam in Egypt. At that time, Egypt remained under the political rule of the Byzantine Empire and under the faith of Coptic Christianity at the religious level, although it was embroiled in deep doctrinal controversies and coexisting with other beliefs. For geographical reasons, the Sinai Peninsula was the first area to be conquered by Arab armies composed, among other units, of 4,000 elite horsemen. In addition, numerous Bedouins from the desert were recruited. Cities fell one after another, and in fact, it was one of the fastest conquests in this phase of Muslim expansion. Pelusio, Balbais, Heliopolis, Fayum, Thabaid. The conquest of the Roman fortress of Babylon, strategically located between the Delta and the Nile Valley, was a significant victory that resulted in the emergence of military camps and administrative settlements, including Fustat and later Al-Qahira, which eventually became the city of Cairo. However, the most crucial battle was fought for the capital, Alexandria, which fell in 641, marking the collapse of Byzantine resistance. In contrast, the southern region of Lower Nubia, where Christianity was deeply rooted, was a later and more difficult conquest for Islam due to both geographical and religious reasons. The area did not fully embrace Islam until the Middle Ages. Since the arrival of Islam in Egypt, the country has remained under its influence. The new Muslim rulers did not impose the religion by force, but established taxes for non-believers and gave preference to converts, which facilitated its status as the predominant religion in later centuries. Though the speed of its spread is contested, Islam had become the majority religion in Egypt by the 11th and 12th centuries. The only significant threats to Muslim rule came from the Byzantine Empire's unsuccessful attempts to restore Christianity and European armies during the Crusades. The latter sought to regain Jerusalem and other sacred sites for Christianity, with the conquest of Egypt being a necessary step towards that goal. By 1168, Egypt had become a battleground between the Seljuks and the Crusaders, with the Fatimid having virtually little or no control, although they sided mostly with the Crusaders. It was in 1168 when the victorious Shirkuh entered Cairo and was named governor of Egypt by the Sultan of Damascus, Nuruddin. When he died a year later, his nephew was immediately appointed as the next governor. He was young, in his early 30s, and full of will. Quickly, he became one of the most famous figures in medieval history. His name was Salahuddin Ayyubi, better known in Western history as Saladin. The young general is one of the few commanders in history who was tremendously respected by friends and enemies alike. When he took control over Cairo, the Fatimids remained isolated in their places. Salahuddin did not seek revenge, but rather waited until their caliph died. Then he expelled the Fatimids out of their palaces and sent them to exile. Unlike his successors, the young general did not seize the Fatimids' wealth, nor did he occupy their palaces. Like a caring ruler, he opened the gates of Cairo and allowed Egyptian citizens to live within the city walls in areas which had been excessively occupied by Fatimid royalty. Because of his sincerity and kindness, he became popular among Egyptian citizens, Muslims and Christians alike, and even had a Jewish personal doctor. And when he later fought Richard the Lionheart, legend goes that Salahuddin ordered his horsemen to carry ice down the mountain to comfort the British king when he was sick. In Cairo, Salahuddin not only built mosques and palaces, but also colleges, hospitals, and a fortress, the Citadel, which still remains one of Cairo's landmarks to this day. The Citadel was built on an elevated spot near the Muqattam Hills and occupies a strategic spot from which you can, to this day, have a panoramic view of Cairo. New city walls were also erected outside the Fatimid walls to defend Cairo from enemy raids. In 1182, Salahuddin marched to Palestine in Syria and never returned to Cairo. For the next 10 years, he fought the Crusaders and managed to end their presence in the region, at least temporarily. When he died in Damascus in 1193, he had almost no personal possessions, but he earned himself a remarkable place in history. He was succeeded in Egypt by his brother Al-Adil, who had to deal with an infamous famine and plague. Al-Adil was in turn succeeded by his son Al-Kamil, who befriended Frederick II and was even knighted in 1192 by Richard the Lionheart. The Ayyubids' rule came to an end when Al-Kamil's nephew Al-Salih died in 1250. The Ayyubids were succeeded by the two consecutive Mamluk reigns. In the 16th century, Egypt became part of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. European powers played an increasing role in Egypt starting in the late 18th century. In 1882, the British invaded and occupied Egypt. The British wanted control of the Suez Canal, which linked the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea and greatly shortened the sailing trip from Asia to Europe. Egypt gained full independence from Great Britain in 1952 and took control of the Suez Canal in 1956.